the slap echoed through the plane. A sharp, resounding crack that left the passengers frozen in disbelief. Eyes widened. Hearts raced. The flight attendant stood there, hand still raised, her face a mixture of shock and defiance. The billionaire, sitting in first class, didn't flinch. His eyes, cold as ice, locked onto hers. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. The low hum of the plane, the murmur of other passengers, everything disappeared. All that remained was the raw, palpable tension between them. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't back down. The slap had been quick, instinctive, and deliberate. She had no regrets. At least, not in that moment. But what followed, no one could have predicted. His reaction was silent, almost eerie. His lips twitched into something between a smirk and a sneer. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He just sat there, as if waiting, calculating. There was something in his gaze that made the air feel even heavier, something that sent a chill down her spine. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice low and smooth. The words didn't carry any anger, just a strange, cold calm. The flight attendant, Marissa, swallowed hard. She had been in the service industry for years. She'd dealt with rude passengers, arrogant elites, even men who thought they could get away with anything. But there was something about this man, something unsettling. His demeanor was different. His presence was unnerving. But she stood her ground. "You crossed the line," she replied firmly. "You were rude, you were demanding, and you insulted me. You deserved it." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes flickered around the cabin. A few passengers had started whispering, some watching with wide eyes, others pretending not to notice. One woman in the seat behind him looked uncomfortable but didn't dare speak up. Marissa could feel the unease creeping through the cabin. The tension was thick. No one was sure what to do. They were all waiting for the billionaire to react, to explode. But he didn't. Instead, he simply leaned back in his seat, folding his arms. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "You'll regret that slap, though. You'll see." With that, he looked out the window, staring into the endless blue sky, as if nothing had happened. The rest of the flight went by in a haze for Marissa. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something big. The encounter had been bizarre, to say the least, but as she moved through the cabin, serving drinks and snacks, she couldn't help but glance back at him every now and then. He seemed perfectly at ease, sitting alone in his first-class seat, looking out the window, as if everything was perfectly normal. But the silence felt ominous. His calm demeanor only added to the dread building inside her. She couldn't explain why, but she felt as though she had just set something in motion, a chain of events that would change everything. Hours passed, and the flight reached its cruising altitude. The plane hummed steadily, carrying over 200 passengers across the vast expanse of the ocean. The crew moved between the aisles, delivering service, checking on passengers. The world outside seemed distant, removed from the reality that was unfolding inside the cabin. Marissa took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of foreboding that had settled over her. She had been on flights where tensions flared, but nothing like this. The slap was impulsive, sure, but her gut told her there was something about this man, something that wasn't right. She caught his reflection in the window, his eyes still trained on the horizon. The way he sat there, so composed, so calm, it made her uncomfortable. She knew he wasn't just some rich businessman or celebrity, though. There was something in the way he carried himself that screamed power. Real power. The kind that wasn't just about money. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed to life. "Attention, flight attendants," the captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "We've just been informed of an emergency situation. We'll be making an unscheduled landing in a nearby city. Please prepare the cabin for arrival." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. An emergency? But everything seemed fine. No one had heard any announcements about turbulence or technical issues. She glanced back at the billionaire. His face was still impassive, but now there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. A satisfaction, perhaps? Something telling her that the worst was yet to come. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The crew rushed through the aisles, strapping in passengers, securing loose items, making sure everyone was ready for the unexpected landing. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers whispered in hushed voices, unsure of what was going on. Marissa had never seen them so nervous. As the plane descended, she couldn't stop thinking about the billionaire. What had he meant by his words? "You'll regret that slap." She tried to push the thought aside, but it lingered, gnawing at the edges of her mind. When the plane finally touched down, the emergency lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow over the cabin. The door opened, and Marissa could see flashing lights outside the window, police cars, emergency vehicles, and a swarm of people standing near the runway. The passengers were instructed to remain seated as a team of officers entered the cabin, their stern faces surveying the room. Marissa felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And then, the billionaire stood up. His presence commanded attention, as though he had orchestrated every single move. Marissa watched in shock as he calmly walked toward the officers, his every step deliberate. The officers moved aside to let him through, without saying a word. "What's going on?" Marissa heard a passenger whisper to another. Her heart pounded. What was happening? Why did they let him through so easily? And why had he acted so strangely? She didn't have time to ponder it for long. The officers turned toward the crew, their eyes scanning the room. "Stay where you are," one of them said sternly. "We'll need to speak to the flight crew." Marissa's mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. There had to be more to this than what she could see. Had this man orchestrated the emergency landing? Was the slap just the beginning? Or was he involved in something far bigger? One thing was certain, she was in deeper than she had ever imagined. The plane was on the ground, but the real storm was only just beginning. The last thing Marissa remembered was the billionaire's cold smile as he turned away from the officers, a look of quiet triumph on his face. Then, darkness. Marissa's head was spinning. She couldn't explain what had just happened. 1 minute, she had been calmly serving drinks, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter with the billionaire, and the next, everything had erupted into chaos. The plane had touched down unexpectedly, emergency crews were swarming the runway, and the officers had allowed the billionaire to pass through without question. What was going on? What did this man have to do with any of this? The rest of the passengers had been instructed to stay in their seats, their faces filled with confusion and fear. Marissa moved slowly down the aisle, her mind still racing. She had to know what was happening. She couldn't just stand there, waiting in uncertainty. It wasn't in her nature. The plane's doors were wide open now, and Marissa could see the flashing red and blue lights outside. The emergency vehicles were lined up along the runway, their lights casting a surreal glow over everything. The officers spoke in hushed tones, their serious faces giving nothing away. Then, as if in slow motion, the billionaire walked back toward the cabin. His steps were measured, confident, as though he had been the one in control all along. Marissa's breath caught in her throat. He was moving toward her now, his cold eyes meeting hers once again. He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile you would give a person who was about to realize just how far they'd gone down a dangerous path. "Are you okay?" he asked in a voice that was deceptively calm. Marissa didn't know how to respond. What was he even talking about? He had done something, he had caused this. She had no idea how, but she could feel it. Everything was happening because of him. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, though she wasn't sure whether she was asking or denying. "Oh, you will soon enough," he said cryptically, his voice low, filled with a quiet menace. Then, before she could respond, he turned and walked down the aisle, leaving her standing there, utterly confused. The hours that followed were filled with confusion and suspicion. Marissa was told to remain in the galley, away from the passengers, until further instructions were given. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis. She had been in the airline industry long enough to know that emergencies like this didn't just happen without reason. But no one was telling her anything. The flight attendants, her colleagues, were just as in the dark as she was. She tried to call her supervisor, but the line was dead. The phone in her pocket buzzed again, and she fumbled to answer it. "Hello?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Marissa, it's Detective Harris," the voice on the other end said. "We need to speak to you. Now." "Detective Harris? What is going on? What happened to the plane? Why are the emergency services here? We'll explain everything when you get here. Just get off the plane and follow the officers. You're a key witness now. Don't worry, we'll make sure you're safe." Before she could ask another question, the line went dead. She stared at the phone for a long moment, wondering what in the world had just happened. A key witness? She wasn't even sure what had happened, let alone what part she played in it. But Detective Harris sounded serious, and she knew she couldn't ignore the call. As Marissa stepped off the plane, the cold night air hit her like a slap. She squinted against the flashing lights, trying to make sense of everything. The emergency crews were still bustling, their movements frantic. She noticed that the billionaire had disappeared. No one had seen him leave, but his absence sent a wave of unease through her. 2 officers approached her as she stepped away from the plane. They were both tall, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a woman, spoke first. "Ma'am, if you could come with us, we have some questions for you." Marissa nodded, too shaken to argue. She followed them, her thoughts swirling in confusion. They led her to a small, dimly lit room on the tarmac where several other officers were waiting. A man, middle-aged, wearing a dark suit, stood at the front. His eyes were sharp, his demeanor professional, but there was something about the way he looked at her that sent a shiver down her spine. "Take a seat," the officer said, pointing to a chair. Marissa sat down, trying to steady her breathing. "Ma'am, we need to know everything that happened on that plane. The slap, the altercation with the billionaire. We've got reports of some strange activity, and we need to understand exactly what took place." Marissa felt a lump form in her throat. She knew the slap had been impulsive. It had been an instinctive reaction to his arrogance, to his demands that crossed every boundary. But this was bigger. Something had happened after that moment. Something she couldn't explain. I don't know what to tell you," she said. Her voice shaky. "It was just a normal flight. Until he made those comments." "Who is he?" the officer asked, his eyes narrowing. "The billionaire," she replied, swallowing hard. "He was sitting in first class. I didn't think much of him at first. But then he started getting rude, demanding things from me, being obnoxious. When I asked him to settle down, he got angry. He insulted me. I slapped him." The officer leaned in, his gaze intense. "And then what happened?" "He didn't react like anyone else would," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't yell, didn't scream. He just sat there, as if he was waiting for something. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't care. He didn't care at all." The officer looked at his partner, then back at Marissa. "What do you mean? What did he say?" He said I would regret it. That I'd see," she answered, her eyes growing wide as the memory played out in her mind. The officers exchanged another glance. The silence in the room thickened. Then, the officer who had been questioning her leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "Look, we need you to stay with us for a while. There's more going on here than we thought. That billionaire you slapped? His name is Donovan Hayes. He's not just any businessman. He's got ties to some very powerful people. And we think this whole situation was set up. The emergency landing? That was just the beginning." Marissa's stomach turned. She felt like she had just stumbled into a world she didn't understand. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" "We think Hayes orchestrated the entire thing. He knew you would slap him. He knew it would cause a chain reaction. And now we have a full-blown situation on our hands. It's bigger than anyone could have expected." The night seemed to stretch on forever. Marissa was given a cold, uncomfortable chair to sit in while the officers continued their investigation. They asked her more questions she didn't have answers to. But one thing became clear: she had unwittingly stepped into something much darker than she could have ever imagined. Donovan Hayes wasn't just a billionaire with an ego. He was a man with a plan. And now, Marissa was a part of it. Marissa couldn't shake the feeling that everything she knew about the world had just shifted on its axis. The night had felt endless, and as dawn began to creep over the horizon, she still sat in that cold, dimly lit room, unable to escape the weight of what had just happened. She had never imagined herself in a situation like this, a flight attendant caught in a conspiracy with a billionaire whose calm, calculating demeanor had now transformed into something far more dangerous. The officers were still questioning her, each round of questions peeling back another layer of mystery. But every time they asked her about Donovan Hayes, her answers grew thinner. How could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? Detective Harris, who had been overseeing the investigation, entered the room. His eyes were tired, but there was something new in his expression, an urgency. He had been going back and forth with various contacts all night, and it was clear that whatever was going on, it was much bigger than they had initially anticipated. "Marissa," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "You need to listen to me carefully. This situation is much more dangerous than we thought. You're not just a witness anymore. You're a part of something, whether you want to be or not." Marissa's stomach clenched. She had been in the dark for so long, but now it seemed like everything was unraveling before her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've looked into Hayes. The things we've uncovered, his connections, his dealings, this isn't just a random act of revenge. This is orchestrated. This is part of something far more dangerous." Marissa tried to absorb the information. Donovan Hayes. A name that had become the centerpiece of her nightmare. Who was he really? How had someone like him, someone who could command such calm and control in the face of an affront, become so entangled in the lives of ordinary people? "I'm not following you," Marissa said, shaking her head. "What's going on? Why did he make it seem like it was such a big deal? What does he want?" Detective Harris leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know exactly what Hayes wants yet, but we know one thing for sure. He's playing a game. And you, Marissa, are a piece on his chessboard." Marissa's heart raced. She had been caught in a game she didn't even know existed. The slap, the emergency landing, the officers, everything had been part of his plan. But why her? Why now? "We've been able to piece together some of his connections," Harris continued. "Hayes isn't just a billionaire businessman. He's got ties to government figures, international corporations, and underground networks. His wealth and influence go far beyond what you or I can understand. He's playing with people's lives like they're nothing." Marissa felt the blood drain from her face. How could she, a simple flight attendant, have become involved in something like this? "Don't worry," Harris said, noticing her expression. "We're doing everything we can to protect you. But the more we learn, the more we realize that you might not be the only person he's targeted. Marissa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The enormity of the situation was suffocating her. The next few days felt like a blur. Marissa was kept in protective custody, though she wasn't sure why. She didn't feel any safer. In fact, it seemed like the walls were closing in on her with every passing hour. She had to stay away from the public eye, stay out of the press, stay hidden. Detective Harris and his team were working tirelessly, but they seemed just as much in the dark as she was. The deeper they dug into Hayes's past, the more complicated the puzzle became. Marissa found herself surrounded by paperwork, phone calls, and cryptic meetings. The questions kept coming. Why had Hayes been on that plane? Why had he allowed himself to be slapped? Why had he done nothing in retaliation? What game was he playing? The answers were elusive, and the pressure was building. She had begun to realize that nothing about her encounter with Hayes had been accidental. This wasn't some random outburst of aggression. This was something planned, something calculated. But what was the endgame? 3 days later, Marissa received a call that would change everything. She was sitting in a small, sterile room at the police station, her mind still reeling from the days of questioning and surveillance. She hadn't been allowed to leave the station, but she hadn't been forced to stay either. The detectives had assured her that she was safe under their watch, but she wasn't sure how much she believed them anymore. The phone on the desk in front of her rang, its shrill sound cutting through the silence. "Hello?" she answered, her voice shaky. "Marissa, it's Donovan Hayes," came the voice on the other end. His voice was smooth, calm, like nothing had changed. Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you want?" "I'm just calling to check in," Hayes said, as if they were old friends catching up. "I hope you're comfortable. I'm sure the police have been keeping you nice and safe. But I think it's time we had a little chat." Marissa's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? You're not supposed to be contacting me." "Oh, I know," he replied, his tone amused. "But I thought it might be nice to have a conversation. After all, we have a lot to discuss. You, me, the game I'm playing. It's all connected, you see." She didn't say anything. Her mind was racing. Hayes was still playing games, even now, even after everything. She had no idea where this was going, but she knew it couldn't be good. "I'm giving you a choice, Marissa," Hayes continued. "You can either stay in hiding, stay in their little protective bubble, and let them try to figure this out. Or you can come with me. I'm sure you'll understand what I mean when you see me." Marissa's throat tightened. "You want me to meet you?" "Oh, I think you'll want to meet me," he said softly. "But don't take too long to decide. There are things I need to finish. And I don't like being kept waiting." The line went dead before Marissa could say another word. Her mind raced. The implications of the call were staggering. Donovan Hayes had just given her an ultimatum. She knew she couldn't stay locked up forever, but could she trust him? What did he want from her? Was this all just part of his game? And what would happen if she refused to meet him? For the first time since all this started, Marissa felt truly lost. Her options seemed slim, and yet the clock was ticking. Every second that passed felt like it was pulling her deeper into a web of lies and deception she didn't understand. Hours passed before Marissa was able to make a decision. She couldn't stay in hiding forever. She couldn't keep running. She had to face whatever this was head-on, no matter how terrifying it seemed. She contacted Detective Harris and explained the call. He was not pleased. "Marissa, you don't understand," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You're putting yourself at risk. Hayes is not someone you want to face. We have no idea what he's planning. He's dangerous." "I know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I can't keep running. I need to know what's going on. I need to know what he wants from me. Harris paused before responding. I understand. But please, be careful. Don't trust him. Whatever you do, stay cautious. I will, she promised, though she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. She didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was clear: Donovan Hayes was not going to stop. And neither would she. Marissa sat in the small, sterile room, staring at the walls. She hadn't been able to shake the conversation she had with Donovan Hayes. His words echoed in her mind. You can either stay in hiding, or you can come with me. I'm sure you'll understand what I mean when you see me. The choice was clear, or so it seemed. But she felt anything but certain. What kind of game was he playing? What was his plan? What did he want from her? She glanced down at her phone, now buzzing incessantly with messages from Detective Harris. He had urged her not to make contact with Hayes, to remain in protective custody, and to trust the investigation. But Marissa knew better. She couldn't keep hiding, not forever. She was caught in a web spun by someone far more powerful than she had ever imagined. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Every second felt like a countdown, and the weight of her decision felt almost unbearable. Could she trust Donovan Hayes? Was it even safe to meet him? She had no other choice but to find out. Hours later, Marissa stood outside a dilapidated building, her pulse racing. She had given Detective Harris the address that Hayes had provided, though she had made it clear she wasn't going alone. A team of officers was nearby, but they were instructed to stay hidden. If anything went wrong, they would be there, ready to step in. The building in front of her was old, worn down. The kind of place you would never expect a billionaire to be associated with. It didn't fit the image of wealth and luxury that Hayes exuded. The contrast only made Marissa more nervous. If he truly was a man of immense power, why would he want to meet her here? She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the floors creaking beneath her feet as she made her way deeper into the building. The place had been abandoned, its windows broken and boarded up. The darkness inside swallowed her whole, and for a moment, she regretted this decision. But she couldn't back out now. She was too far in. As she walked through the narrow hallways, her mind raced. The silence was deafening. She could hear nothing but her own footsteps. The building was eerily still, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. At the end of the hall, a door opened, and Marissa's heart stopped. Standing in the doorway was none other than Donovan Hayes. He stood there, tall and imposing, his expression unreadable. "Come in," he said calmly, his voice as smooth as ever. "I've been expecting you." Marissa hesitated, but she forced herself to step forward. This was it. There was no turning back now. The moment Marissa crossed the threshold, she was hit with the smell of stale air and old furniture. The room was sparsely furnished, with a few chairs and a table in the center. Hayes gestured for her to sit. She glanced around, noting the contrast between his immaculately tailored suit and the rundown surroundings. It was as though he didn't belong here, like he was playing a role in a larger scheme that only he understood. "Sit," he said again, this time more insistently. She sat, though her nerves were on edge. He took a seat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "So, you decided to come," he said with a small smile, as though he'd been waiting for her to do exactly that. "I knew you would. You're not the type to back down. I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not going to be part of it," Marissa shot back, trying to keep her voice steady, though she couldn't entirely mask the fear that crept into her words. Hayes chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. "Oh, you already are. You just don't know it yet." Marissa clenched her fists. "I'm not here for your games. What do you want from me?" Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "What do I want? You could say I want justice. You could say I want to prove a point. But I prefer to think of it as an opportunity. An opportunity? Marissa repeated, her confusion growing. Let me explain, he continued. You see, Marissa, the world operates on a series of systems. Some of them are small, insignificant. But others, well, they're far-reaching. They can shape economies, influence governments, control the fate of entire nations. And I've learned how to manipulate these systems. Marissa's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I've spent years building something. Something vast, something powerful. But it's not just money or influence, it's control. Control of how things are done, how people think, how events unfold. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. And now, I need you to be part of it. Marissa stared at him, stunned. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not some pawn in your game. I have nothing to do with this. You do, Hayes said simply. You already have everything to do with it. You just don't realize it yet. For the next hour, Hayes spoke with calm authority, laying out his vision for the future. It was a future in which he controlled the flow of information, the flow of power. He spoke of grand plans, hidden alliances, and covert operations that spanned across continents. It was like listening to a man who had already written the future and was now looking for the right people to help him carry it out. Marissa sat in stunned silence as he explained his intentions. She couldn't fathom how anyone could have so much power, so much control over the world's systems. And yet, the more he spoke, the more it became clear that Hayes wasn't some mere businessman. He was a mastermind, a puppeteer pulling strings behind the scenes, orchestrating events that no one else could see. The worst part was that she was already tangled in his web. The slap, the incident on the plane, had been his starting point. It was never just about revenge. It had been a calculated move, a way to draw her in, to get her to play her part. Why me? Marissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you choose me? Hayes looked at her with a glint of amusement in his eyes. You were the perfect candidate. You're not part of the elite, but you're not powerless either. You understand what it means to survive, to fight for something. You have the will to make decisions, to take action. You're exactly what I need. Marissa felt the weight of his words sink in. She wasn't just a bystander. She was being used, manipulated, and she hadn't even realized it. Everything she had thought was happening to her, it was all part of his plan. You're a pawn, she said bitterly. That's all you've made me. Hayes didn't flinch. We're all pawns, Marissa. The difference is that some of us learn to control the game. Just as Marissa was about to respond, the door to the room suddenly slammed open. Two men in suits stepped inside, their expressions unreadable. Hayes didn't even flinch. These are my associates, he said calmly, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just occurred. They'll help guide you, if you choose to accept my offer. You have a role to play, Marissa. And I think you'll find that it's much more important than anything you've done in your life so far. Marissa's pulse raced as the two men walked toward her, their eyes cold and calculating. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. No. I won't be part of this. I'm leaving. Hayes didn't move. You can walk away if you like, but there's one thing you need to understand, you've already made your choice. You're already part of this. There's no going back now. The tension in the room was palpable. Marissa felt the weight of his words pressing down on her like a vice. She could run, but would it even matter? You're not in control, Hayes, she spat, her anger rising. Hayes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he merely watched her, his gaze unreadable. I am, he said finally, his voice chilling. I've always been. Marissa couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, as though it was pressing against her chest with every heartbeat. The cold stare of Donovan Hayes was unbearable, and she could feel the tension in the room tightening with every second. She had entered that building to face a man who had manipulated her every move. A man who had drawn her into a dangerous web that she was struggling to understand. She had hoped, even prayed, that somehow there would be a simple answer, a way to walk away from this nightmare. But Hayes made it clear, there was no walking away. "You think you can leave now?" Hayes's voice was low, almost amused. "Do you truly believe that you have a choice?" Marissa's blood ran cold. She tried to steady herself, but her hands were shaking. The two men in suits behind Hayes moved closer, standing at the ready, as if prepared to subdue her at any moment. "You're not in control," Marissa said, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. Her voice, though shaky, held a defiance she hadn't realized she still had. "You've lied to me from the beginning. I'm not part of your plans. I'm not your pawn." Hayes's smile didn't falter. "Oh, Marissa, you still don't get it, do you? You've been playing this game from the moment you stepped onto that plane. The slap, the emergency landing, the media frenzy, none of that was an accident. You're here because I need you. But more importantly, you're here because you wanted to be." Marissa's mind raced. She wanted to scream, to break free, but she had no idea how to make sense of everything. The words Hayes was saying didn't align with the reality she had known. It didn't add up. "You're not making sense," she said, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. "I didn't choose this. You made me a part of it. You manipulated me." "I didn't force you to do anything," Hayes replied calmly. "You made choices along the way. You always had a choice. Just like you have one now." Marissa's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the gravity of his words. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What is it you need?" Hayes leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked onto hers. "I need you to understand what you're a part of. What you've always been a part of. The awakening." Marissa's mind began to unravel. She had thought that she had been living a simple life, a flight attendant, just doing her job. She had thought that things like corruption, manipulation, and power struggles were things that happened to other people, far away from her. But now, it seemed like everything had been planned. Everything had been manipulated to bring her to this moment. "You think your life is ordinary," Hayes continued. "But that's part of the illusion. You've been living in a world that I built. You've been breathing in the air I've created. You just didn't know it. Until now." Marissa's stomach churned. She was starting to see it. Every seemingly random encounter, every twist in her life, everything had been a part of his plan. She had been a cog in a machine, and only now was she realizing the full scale of it. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, barely able to process his words. "I control everything, Marissa," Hayes said, his tone becoming darker. "Every decision you've made. Every step you've taken. It's all been part of my design. And now, you'll play the final part." She didn't know what that meant, but the cold dread in her chest told her that whatever it was, it wouldn't end well. The truth behind the mask. The room felt smaller now. The walls seemed to close in around her, and Marissa could barely hear the sound of her own thoughts over the pounding of her heartbeat. Hayes's words were ringing in her ears, drowning out everything else. "I'm not playing any more games with you," she said, trying to push back against the terror rising inside her. Hayes's smile widened. "You can't stop it, Marissa. You've already made your move. You've crossed a line, and now you'll see where it leads." For the first time, Marissa saw something in Hayes's eyes, something that wasn't just cold calculation, but something darker. A glimmer of power, a man who believed he was untouchable. She could see it now, like a shadow that had been lurking beneath the surface of his charm and his wealth. He wasn't just a businessman, a billionaire with a reputation. He was a puppet master, a man who had made the world bend to his will. And she had been one of his puppets. "Why me?" she repeated, her voice hoarse with emotion. "What makes me so special?" "Because you're not special," Hayes replied, his tone flat, almost bored. "You're just one of the millions of people I've manipulated to serve my purpose. The real question is, why did you think you were any different?" The words hit her like a slap, but this time it was different. She wasn't stunned. She wasn't numb. The anger inside her boiled over, and for the first time, she truly understood the depth of his cruelty. "You've used me," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "But you're wrong. I'm not like you. I'm not just a puppet." Hayes's smile faded, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, an acknowledgement that she had hit a nerve. "You think you can escape this?" he asked softly. "You think you can stand up to me?" Marissa stood her ground. "I don't need to escape. I need to stop you." A silence fell between them, thick with tension. Hayes stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't something you can just walk away from. You are in this whether you want to be or not." "You've underestimated me," Marissa replied, her voice steady. "I'm not going to be your pawn. I'm not going to play your game." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "You're already playing it. You've been playing it from the moment you decided to step into my world." The offer. Before she could react, one of the men in suits stepped forward. He was holding something, a file, thick with papers. He handed it to Hayes, who glanced at it briefly before placing it on the table in front of Marissa. "This," Hayes said, his voice calm once more, "is the future. It's your future, if you choose to accept it." Marissa opened the file, her hands trembling. The documents inside were filled with charts, figures, names, things she couldn't fully understand. But what struck her was the last page. It was a simple letter, addressed to her, with a single sentence. "You are the key to everything." Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the world. About power. About control. "Do you understand now?" Hayes asked, his voice almost kind. "You have something I need, Marissa. You have the key to all of it. You're the final piece." Marissa looked up at him, her mind spinning. Was this really happening? Had her life really been a pawn in his game? She didn't know what to believe anymore. She didn't know who to trust. "I'm not your key," she said, barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to let you use me." Hayes's gaze hardened. "You don't have a choice." The decision. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Hayes's words hung in the air, and for a moment, Marissa felt like she was drowning in them. She had to make a choice. She had to decide whether she was going to let him control her life, whether she was going to let him control everything. But there was one thing she knew for sure, she couldn't back down now. She couldn't let him win. Not when she had come this far. She stood up, her hands steadying themselves on the edge of the table. She looked at Hayes, straight in the eye. "I don't know what your game is, but I'm done playing by your rules. I'm taking control of my own life." Hayes didn't speak for a moment. He simply stared at her, as though assessing her. "You think you're in control," he said slowly. "But you're not. You never were." "We'll see about that," Marissa said, her voice unwavering. And in that moment, she realized that the fight was far from over. This wasn't just about escaping Hayes. It was about taking back control. Marissa's hands trembled as she stood in front of Hayes, the weight of everything she had learned crashing down on her. The revelation of the conspiracy, the control he wielded over her, and the realization that she was more than just a victim, it all rushed through her mind like a torrent, threatening to drown her. But she had one thing that Hayes didn't have, the will to fight. The will to survive. For the first time since this twisted game had begun, Marissa wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced betrayal, manipulation, and the cold indifference of a man who saw her as nothing more than a piece on his chessboard. But now, she understood the stakes, and it was no longer about her survival. It was about taking back control, breaking free from the chains he had placed around her life. Hayes leaned back in his chair, watching her with that familiar, smug smile, as though he had already won. He had been pulling strings for so long, controlling every aspect of her life, every decision she made. But Marissa wasn't going to be his puppet anymore. "You think you can walk away from this?" Hayes asked, his voice low and dangerous. Marissa met his gaze, unflinching. "I already have. A dangerous game." The room felt colder now, the tension thick enough to slice through with a knife. Hayes wasn't used to being challenged, not in the way Marissa had just done. She could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, a crack in the facade of his control. For the first time, she realized that Hayes, the man who thought he was invincible, wasn't as untouchable as he wanted the world to believe. "You have no idea what you're up against," Hayes said, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I can make your life a living hell." Marissa took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. "You've already tried. But I'm still standing." Hayes's smile faltered, and Marissa could see the shift in him. The man who had once looked down on her, the man who had orchestrated her downfall, was now facing someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. "Don't make the mistake of underestimating me, Hayes," she said, her voice steady. "You're not the only one who's been playing games. You're not the only one who can control this narrative." The truth unveiled. As the seconds ticked by, the atmosphere in the room grew more charged. It was as if the universe itself had come to a standstill, waiting for what would happen next. Marissa's mind was racing, piecing together everything she had learned about Hayes, about the web of lies and manipulation he had spun around her. But now, she needed something more. She needed the truth, the final piece that would bring down the entire house of cards. "What is it you really want, Hayes?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. "What's your endgame?" For a moment, Hayes didn't answer. He seemed to be calculating something, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his tone colder than it had ever been. "You think you've figured it all out, don't you?" Hayes said, his eyes narrowing. "But you're still missing the most important piece. I didn't just pull you into this because I could. I did it because I needed you. You're the key to everything." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice rising with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're the final piece of the puzzle," Hayes replied, his words like a hammer striking the ground. "You've been the missing link all along. Everything, this whole game, it all leads to you." The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just part of the plan. She was the plan. Hayes had set everything in motion for this moment, every slap, every accusation, every twisted turn. She had been the one he needed to complete his scheme. "No," Marissa said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I won't be part of your plan." Hayes's face twisted into a grim smile. "You already are. And now you're going to finish it." The showdown. The air in the room grew heavy, as though the very space around them was holding its breath. Marissa knew this was it, the final confrontation. There would be no turning back. No running. No negotiating. It was do or die. "Tell me what you need from me," Marissa said, her voice cold. "I want to know the truth." Hayes leaned in closer, his eyes locked onto hers. "You don't get to ask the questions anymore, Marissa. You're too deep in this. There's no way out." She clenched her fists, her mind racing. She had come this far, and there was no way she was going to let Hayes win. She had to find a way to turn the tables. And then, as if something clicked inside her, she remembered the file. The one Hayes had handed to her earlier. She remembered the last page, the note that said, you are the key to everything. It all made sense now. She was the key, just not in the way Hayes thought. She wasn't the pawn in his game. She was the one who could end it. Marissa took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let Hayes control her anymore. She wasn't going to be his weapon. She was going to turn the tables. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady and firm. "You're not in control. I am. A final choice." The tension in the room was unbearable. Hayes stood there, a silent force, watching her every move. Marissa could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She knew what she had to do. "Do you really think you can escape this?" Hayes asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Marissa stood tall. "I don't need to escape. I just need to stop you." It was then that Hayes took a step back, his eyes widening with realization. He had underestimated her. He had thought she was just another pawn in his game, another piece to control. But Marissa had one thing he didn't: her own will. Her own strength. "I'm not the key to your game," Marissa said, her voice unwavering. "You are. You're the one who's been playing all along. But it's over now. I'm ending it." And just like that, the game shifted. The final piece had fallen into place. Hayes's expression faltered, and for the first time, there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. He realized too late that he had lost. Marissa had taken control of her own story. The narrative had flipped, and Hayes no longer held the power. The lesson. As Marissa walked out of the room, leaving Hayes behind, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She had done it. She had survived. And in doing so, she had proven that no one, no matter how powerful, could control her. She was free. But it wasn't just freedom that she had gained. It was strength. It was resilience. It was the realization that, no matter how dark or twisted life might get, there was always a way to fight back. There was always a way to reclaim your own story. And as she stepped into the light, she knew one thing for sure: her journey was far from over. This was just the beginning. Subscribe my YouTube channel. Thank you.